Frost builds, huh? I definitely know where I'd like to start. Behold! Avalanche Frost. Probably a classic build, if that means anything at this point. This is an easy way to freeze enemies in a huge area and pretty much entirely remove their armor, making them easy pickings. In this video, I'm going to talk a whole lot about this type of build for Frost, how it works, what it might be useful for, and ways to customize it so you can have fun with it. If you want to watch me play this build in missions, I'll be live on Twitch the Saturday following this video's publication. Details in the description, including an archive if that broadcast already happened. If you want to watch gameplay of this build, take a look at that. Okay, so what's going on here is just the simple range and strength combination that does the main things Frost is good at. Freezing a lot of enemies in a large area, and casting Snow Globe that will be very tanky. It's easy to use. You're basically just hitting the button that does what you need. Do you need to defend an area, or do you need to kill enemies in an area, or maybe both? And then you do the thing. So Avalanche reduces 40% armor. That means that we need 250% strength to get it to remove all armor from enemies. Okay, so you might be thinking, let's just add a bunch of strength. So we'll take, probably gonna be Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, look at the full ranked one, and look at that, 100% armor reduction. But there's a problem already. Frost only has 150 energy, so with Blind Rage and no other efficiency, you actually can't cast Avalanche. You need 155 energy, which Frost simply does not have. You can go out here, get full energy, you just can't, can't do it. You need at least some efficiency. Additionally, you'll notice that the radius is simply not that large. 15 meters is okay, but not the kind of world-freezing monstrosity that I was showing you before. In fact, I'll demonstrate that quickly. This seems like a good distance, and I'll cast it. And as you can see, enemies even pretty close by, it feels like, don't get frozen. To me, this is not good enough. If it's good enough for you, that's cool. Maybe you want to group enemies together and then freeze them. That's perfectly fine. But to me, this is not quite enough. I want a lot of range, and if you want a lot of range, there's another problem because overextended reduces strength. So putting this on, now the strength is considerably behind where it would need to be to remove all armor from enemies. So 77% armor reduction might seem like a lot, but it's kind of not. I mean, if the enemy has thousands of armor, and then you remove 77%, Frost only has 300 armor, and that's still 50% damage reduction. You'd be doing like half or less damage. It's a fairly big deal. If you want this to make enemies more vulnerable, you do care about getting it close to, if not to 100%, armor reduction. If that wasn't enough of a death flag for what's about to happen, then I hope you're watching carefully, because I'm going to add Umbrella Intensify. Getting some more strength sounds like exactly what we want, right? And look at that, 238%. I wonder what would happen if I added, well, the build doesn't have a way to survive yet. You will be freezing enemies a lot and defending locations, but some basic survivability would be nice. You know, it's a well-rounded, cozy, simple to play build. It'd be nice to have some survivability, right? Bop, and would you look at that, we're at 99% armor reduction. Is this enough to feel adequate against most enemies? I think it is. I think that because I tried it and it feels like it is enough. I feel like this is doing something helpful, and that's good enough for me. We did do the math during the brainstorming live stream on Twitch that we did to come up with the ideas for Frost builds. We talked about this. We talked about, is 99% armor reduction enough? We're talking about another framework that had 95% armor reduction. You took like a level 100 heavy gunner, you can check the armor, it's like 6,400 something armor, and then you remove 99% of that, you get 64 whatever armor, right? Is that a significant amount of damage reduction? It is, it's probably 5 or 10%, I don't remember exactly. But that is acceptable. This is still a huge damage increase, right? 95% armor reduction is surprisingly less significant. There's a very big difference. What aura? Well, I think for a loadout like this, something that's going to be kind of cozy, Energy Siphon is nice. Now I'm going to go on to add kind of a lot of energy to this loadout. Let's briefly address Corrosive Projection. So let's plop that on. This gives 99% armor reduction. This removes 18% of enemy armor. Well, would you look at that? We can just use Corrosive Projection to get the rest of the way there, right? Let's find out. And bop. Nope. That is still a yellow health bar. The 99% armor reduction and the 18% from Corrosive Projection are separate. So you remove 99% of enemy armor, and then of the 1% that's left, you remove 18% of that. So yeah, not very good. Yeah, for a cozy loadout like this, I don't mind something like Sprint Boost. Realistically, I would probably like to have an Aura Forma on here so that I can use Swift Momentum, or maybe even something like Aerodynamic or Growing Power would get you the rest of the way there, sure. 99% armor reduction can actually be a good thing in the sense that enemies will still have their armor type as well. Enemies that have armor count as having their armor type, like ferrite armor, and they're vulnerable to things like corrosive that do more damage against ferrite armor. They take less damage from slash damage, which has a weakness against ferrite armor. And they also count as having their health type, so cloned flesh. So these Grineer that are in this little demo, they have ferrite armor and cloned flesh. If you shoot them with something like viral, for example, or, heat, they'll take more damage from those things because they have cloned flesh. And if you hit them with corrosive or puncture, they'll take more damage from those things because they have ferrite armor. They have both at the same time. None of them overlap except slash. So if you're going to kill enemies with slash damage, now remember, slash status effects go through armor, but slash damage, having a little bit of armor left does mean that they're defended against slash because of the armor, and then vulnerable to the slash because of the health, but you come out of that equation behind. You do a little less damage than if they had no armor. I don't see who is using slash damage only, no slash status effects, nothing else, just slash damage, to kill enemies with armor in this loadout, and then they'd be worried because the enemies have a little more armor. But if that's you, then you should know. So I'm going to add some more range and finish out the loadout like so. What else needs to go on here? Well, I said I kind of wanted it to be a cozy loadout where you can relax and just have some damage reduction and stuff. So adaptation makes a lot of sense. Plop that on. Unranked copies just fine. And then this amount of armor is a little paltry. Having a bit more would be nice. Arcane Guardian is a really elegant way to do that. If you found a way to squeeze in one more mod slot, Umbral Fiber would also be really nice. You could then finish out the amount of strength that you're looking for, I suppose. You could downrank Transient Fortitude or Blind Rage, probably Blind Rage, to get a little bit more efficiency back. That would be nice. You could remove Streamline, I suppose. You could take this off, add Umbral Fiber, and then downrank Blind Rage, to 8 or something, because you got the difference in the amount of strength you needed. And then maybe you would have full armor reduction, probably not with rank 8, maybe with rank 9. You'd have the same, good armor reduction, but then you'd save a mod slot, and then you have armor, and then you save the arcane slot. Whatever. Maybe in the future I'll put an Umbral Form on here. That's the thing you could do if you were interested. There's no Helminth ability here. Ice Wave and Freeze are not doing anything in particular. Freeze, as always, is kind of nice to keep around to clean up Snow Globes. Snow Globes in this loadout are, they're tanky. Snow Globe doesn't have a duration. The invulnerability period's not affected by duration. So a pretty solid deal overall. You get the best of Frost's more powerful abilities, and then you just want a lot of energy, and there are a lot of ways you can get that. Obviously, Zeneric is a good option. Azah using Exodia Brave is a great way to get energy. Frost also doesn't have any channeled abilities, which would disable the energy regeneration, so this is a great choice, particularly on Frost. You could even use a heavy attack weapon that just does upfront damage. You're really helping it along by removing the armor with Avalanche, so heavy attack weapons are even in some way particularly suited for this loadout, so that's a very nice fit. And then of course it's the Wizard. What a great overall weapon. You can use Energizing Shot to get energy orbs with more effectiveness. You could use Pax Bolt. I'm not sure how sensible this is, but if you grab a headshot, then your next Avalanche will cost less energy, which effectively gained you energy. Fair enough. In a loadout where you have low efficiency, this is solid, I suppose. And then this is just a great weapon overall. It's got very rounded damage types. You get that corrosive and radiation against different kinds of armor, cold against shields, and a little bit more against alloy armor, like with radiation. It's a good base damage. The rest of the damage is puncture, which is good against ferrite armor. Just a really well-rounded weapon. Very, very good fire rate and output with the chaining and such. So the status is not really a problem. You can invest a lot in crit and still get a ton of status output and get that crit chance really consistent. Personally, I think these things have pretty small magazines, so I went with Ice Storm, but besides that, a pretty straightforward weapon to build. A quick word about the magazine size. So you can't get full crit investment, full crit chance, unless you use one of the not largest magazines, loaders. So I chose Splat because it's the largest one that lets you get full critical chance. That's not necessary, that's why I chose to do it that way. Personally, I value the damage more than the range on this thing, but that's a trade-off that you could make as well. A really nice, powerful weapon overall. Not too much to say about weapons here. You are leaving enemies vulnerable to headshots by freezing them in place. So if you wanted to use something like the Nell or a sniper rifle with sharpshooter to give yourself more energy, that's not a bad choice. I think that's a nice fit. You'll pretty easily be able to line up a headshot on enemies. Although keep in mind the duration of the freeze is actually pretty low. You just saw there that was us running up against the timer on the duration of the freeze. But the question that remains is, what else do you add? It's such a thin loadout, you know? You and me, you're watching this channel, you're familiar with the Zandy Pants stuff. You know that I feel like this loadout is a little thin. Now, yes, it's very good at the things Frost is good at doing, but you know, Ice Wave is not doing much. There's no reason this couldn't be a Helminth ability, right? We haven't even chosen a companion yet. There's tons of room in here. What are we gonna do? When you're laying in the chair like this, the first place to start thinking is how much space is left on the loadout? What kind of space is left on the loadout? And what stats does the loadout already have? Now, as you saw before, when you build this build, the way that I chose to build it, you don't really have any mod space left, and there's very little duration or efficiency. Not none, but it's not a lot, right? So anything that requires duration or is very energy hungry, so efficiency, or is mostly relying on an augment to be an effective addition, those are all kind of out, which I view as kind of a good thing. That reduces the options. It should make it easier to choose. But for example, something that I would be interested in, but which isn't going to be a great fit with my version of the loadout, is Spellbind with Spellbound Harvest. Spellbound Harvest lets you regain energy using Titania's Spellbind by hitting a lot of enemies. We have good range, so that's great. You can't recast Spellbind on enemies that are affected by it, so low duration is actually pretty good for generating energy with this, because you can use it on the same targets over and over. And the energy you gain is based on strength, which this loadout has a lot of. Great fit, except that I don't really feel like you have room for the augment. If you're interested in this, you could try to make room for the augment. That's not a bad idea, but that's why I am not going that way. Something like Elemental Ward is not a bad idea, but the duration is really low. I don't really want this with low duration. The base duration is high, so maybe it's not so bad. Personally, I think that's a bit of a deal breaker, but it would be nice to have a lot of extra health or armor, or, you know, the Toxin Ward is a really good overall buff. Speaking of which, you could add a damage buff, sure. I think that's kind of boring, and Frost does already have Freeze Force, an augment for his first ability that gives you more cold damage, but again, this takes up an augment slot. So some other obvious recommendations that don't really make sense here. Pillage. This mostly keeps you survivable by giving you a ton of overshields, but we already have a lot of tankiness with health. Now, if you wanted to, you could remove that tankiness with health and rely on Pillage instead. That's fine. We certainly have the range for it to be effective, not much duration. That's not a bad choice. I just feel it's going against one of Frost's strengths, which is that it's not that hard to make Frost tanky with good base armor and reasonable base health. Some things that don't excite me, but which I don't think are a terrible idea. You could use something like Defy to just get armor. This is effectively just saving you the slot you're using for Arcane Guardian, which I don't think that's gaining you much, but not a terrible idea. No, I think this may be a loadout where you go for something a little different. Vile Rush doesn't have an energy cost even when you infuse it on another Warframe, which is a bit of a peculiarity. I would think of Lavos as being the one giving it no energy cost, but this ability just doesn't have an energy cost. So if you put this on Frost, for example, you have low efficiency, but this doesn't cost any energy. Or something like Zada's Whisper. This is a damage buff and doesn't require an augment. You know, you could use something like Roar. I think that's a little bit boring, and you'll also notice that Roar has, 30-second duration. It's a damage increase, sure, but Zada's Whisper has the benefit of having a little bit longer duration when we have, not terrible duration, but it's not very long, right? This ability is also cheap. It doesn't cost a lot of energy. If you're not familiar with how this ability works, it's not like an elemental damage buff. It gives you extra damage on top of whatever damage you're doing. It's just that extra damage is dealt as void damage. So it doesn't interrupt what elements you're trying to activate. It's essentially Roar. It just gives you void damage instead of more of the kind of damage you had. And overall, this is cozy, a nice damage buff to round out your general use loadout. I think this is a nice one. I'm going to plop it in. That leaves us with companions. Now, if this is going to be a general use loadout, I think it's a good idea to pick a general use companion. That seems appropriate. You could go with something like a Panzerwolfeifler to spread viral spores. That's kind of nice. You get the benefit of removing the armor, so kind of corrosive, and then the spores, so that's viral. And you could just use weapons that do damage, just whatever damage, or a lot of weapons that don't have good status chance maybe. Maybe you're itching to use those. This could be a good place to do that. It's a general use loadout. Maybe you just want to slap on whatever weapons and have it work out. That's not a bad idea. I'm also sort of interested in something like an Adarzacavat here. In a loadout like this, where you're just not doing that much else, I kind of like the idea of having something to play around a little bit. Something like the Adarzacavat's Cat's Eye buff. Cat's Eye gives flat critical chance, so it doesn't multiply the critical chance the weapon already has, it just adds 60% to whatever that value is. What's good about this is that it allows weapons that don't normally have very good critical chance, but perhaps have a good critical multiplier, to really take advantage of that potential damage they have. There are many examples, but the one I'll talk about is the Bosmu, since I didn't have a primary slotted in yet. This weapon's alt fire fires this kind of beam thing, and weirdly, the critical chance is 2%, but the crit multiplier is crazy high. This is with a critical damage mod on, of course. So if you want to use a weapon like this, maybe every so often, you're curious to have a loadout where you mostly just use your energy generating stuff, but then every so often your Adarzacavat gives you Cat's Eye, you swap over to this and you get that big beam damage, baby. And then you can unload some big damage from your chaining laser beam. I really don't understand exactly what's happening with this particular firing mode. But anyway, that's something that you could do. Again, when you have a loadout that's thin like this, I like to add a little, every so often you do things a little differently. When this buff comes up, you change things up a little bit. And speaking of changing things up a little bit, this fashion frame. Oh baby, where do I even begin? I made some people angry by putting this weird helmet on this other skin. I love to mismatch these. I know it upsets people every single time. I just really like this helmet, and I think it pretty seamlessly matches up with this skin. I think this is one where the ephemera is helping. It gives you this little icy aura, you see? And so it kind of ties the whole loadout together a little. But overall, I don't know. I feel like this helmet is made for this loadout, for this appearance on this loadout. This is just your spicy boy ice wizard, getting in there, doing the big damage, impressing the corrupted heavy gunners with his mastery over frost. Not a lot to say. I also like the Misa Prime Sayandana. I think this effect reminds me of a blizzard. And I don't know, the Frostfall ephemera, these are slow snowflakes. And you could use the Vengeful Frost, Vengeful Chill ephemera. This is a more aggressive snow effect that maybe matches this kind of better. Personally, I think they're still kind of not the same speed, and I'm also using this for another Frost loadout, so what are you gonna do? I decided to go for the Cloud. A nice, peaceful, assertive loadout. A loadout that says, snowy weather, no matter. I will persevere with my snow cloud that is glitching out over my head. Folks, thanks for watching. I also want to give a special shout out to my Twitch community. We stream little brainstorming streams before I do framework weeks for given warframes in this series, and it really helps a lot. It gets the ideas flowing. Sometimes I don't agree with other people's suggestions, or they don't agree with mine, but it's very fun to see what everybody likes doing with a warframe, and it really does change my recommendations a lot. I would like to take credit more as a curator of these ideas. I certainly don't come up with all of them myself, but this is just something simple that I wanted to show. I don't want Framework to always be about these totally out there ideas. I want there to be something for everyone, and I think that it can be educational and interesting to go to something simple like this. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward to the rest, and I'll see you next time.